This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 723. This week we welcome Tina Brueckner, Dr. Elliott Horner, and Dawn Weeks. We're going to talk about the new ASHRAE Guideline 42-2023, Enhanced Indoor Air Quality in Commercial and Institutional Buildings. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can go on the show. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association at AIHA.org. IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at EIA-USA.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com, BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, Actionable Insights at getinsights.org.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to Dawn Weeks, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, who's here with us in person today. Dawn was first to identify the relationship between ABC's Wide World of Sports and Victor Bocatage. Dawn said that Victor Bocatage's ski jumping accident represented the agony of defeat on the program, and that's correct. Here's this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question. In what year did the American Society of Heating and Ventilation Engineers publish its first heating and ventilating guide? Back to you, Joe.
Okay, so let's first introduce our guest. Tina Brueckner is the Senior Engineering Manager for Engineering Development at Engineering System Group's Federal Business Unit. She oversees a team that provides schematic and detailed design submittals, scopes of work, and measured and verified savings for the technical solutions on performance contract. She's the Subcommittee Chair for Guideline 42 and has a BS in Electrical Engineering from the Milwaukee School of Engineering, and is a certified energy manager and lead accredited professional. Dr. Elliott Horner is the lead scientist at UL Solutions, has worked in the indoor air quality field for over 30 years, conducting research and field investigations, providing training, disaster response, and litigation support, and was the director of an IAQ laboratory. He's a recognized expert on fungal allergens and the impact of moisture in buildings, and he's published over 50 research papers and book chapters. Dawn Weeks has over 48 years of comprehensive consultation experience and project experience in the implementation and management of inspections for hazardous materials in numerous buildings throughout Canada and the United States. Most of our listeners are familiar with Dawn. He is also a certified industrial hygienist and a certified safety professional. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you aboard.
It's great to be here.
All right, let's start with Tina. You're a little new to our audience, so I want to kind of give the folks a little idea of what you do. Tell us a little bit more about why you do what you work, what you do, and why you're part of this effort.
Sure. I work in performance contracting, which is usually focused around energy. And so I've done a lot of energy improvement projects. Early on in my career, I discovered that when you close the outside air, there's kind of scary things in buildings. And it introduced me to this concept. And when I've been involved with ASHRAE for a very long time, and one of the committees that I got involved with was Standard 62.1. And when we started getting involved with 62.1, it was kind of my first standard that I was involved with. And I guess I never made the connection that you really can only meet code with 62 or with the standard. And so when the concept of the guideline came about in our discussions, it was how do we go above and beyond the standard? And so I was pretty darn interested in helping with the document that we're talking about today.
Tina, is it accurate to say that this guideline builds on to what's kind of required by 62.1?
Yes, that's exactly what it is all about. It's really going above and beyond the standard, but also making sure that we're using validated information to create that. So
and let's go over to Dr. Elliott Horner. Elliott, can you update our listeners? I can't believe it's been over 10 years since you've been on the show. At that time, I don't think you were with UL. Can you give our audience a little idea of what you're doing these days?
I was already with UL at that point. 2011, UL bought Air Quality Sciences, and that was when I became a UL employee. And then recently, the new CEO changed our name to UL Solutions, but it's the same UL. What have I been doing? Some chamber testing, got involved in particle measurements, still doing some work with moisture, and a little bit more work with standard setting groups like ASHRAE and ASTM.
It's great to have you back after all this time. I should have had you sooner. And Dawn, of course, a lot of people on the call know you, but why do you feel you're the one who kind of told me, hey, we need to do a show on this? And when I first saw it came out, I was like, okay, that's interesting. But I didn't have a copy to read, and I didn't realize how good it is. And then you said, we ought to do a show on this, and I was able to get my hands on a copy and read it over. What a huge effort and an excellent document. Can you tell us a little bit more about what led to your interest in this, and why do you think the industry needed a guideline beyond ASHRAE 62.1?
Yes, well, as we were talking before the show, I mean, this is an ongoing effort that started probably in 2016 or 2017. I was a member of the 62.1 at that point, and this came up as a guideline that would be a useful tool for all of the IAQ community, looking to go beyond the minimum standards provided in 62.1. It took quite a while to get this together because there was a lot of different information that people wanted to include in there, but it certainly is a guide that builds on the 62.1, which is the minimum standards, particularly in terms of ventilation, and enhances the indoor air quality in a building. So it's to fill a gap between the minimum requirements and the standards, which leads to the best practices enhanced for IAQ as shown in guidance 42.
Who wants to jump in here real quick? And, ASHRAE 62.1 was updated in 2022. And I just want to kind of start with what were the key updates at that point, and then we'll build on that with the guideline.
Well, I'll start it off because I'm always been a big mouth. So one of the big changes has been with regards to the way in which the standard looks at indoor humidity. It was published in 2019 and updated in 2020, but it basically is, it's a section in 2022, 5.12, which talks about the type of elements or equipment and controls needed to control maximum indoor dew point. So this is dew point replacing relative humidity as the criteria by which you judge whether something is successful. And obviously the current humidity requirements are meant to address mold and comfort. So it's an impact on the design in terms of the amount of water vapor that's available for condensation. And it changes what you look at in terms of the surface as opposed to relative humidity, which quite frankly is not a good indication of what might be on the surfaces around the area. So that was changed. And you can look in the section I mentioned, 5.12 of 2022, which gives you a pretty good idea of exactly what it is in terms of the dew point, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and it shows a diagram which basically applies only to mechanically cooled spaces, but gives you a good idea of exactly what you're aiming for.
And Don, don't forget that applies to periods of unoccupied when buildings are unoccupied, which is what had historically been one of the problems, is lack of humidity control during unoccupied periods.
Thank you, Elliot. That's great. I didn't bring that up. You're right. So that was one of the big changes I saw. And Tina or Elliott, what else were you looking at in terms of changes?
I think one of the things that also we reorganized the systems and equipment area to reflect the actual airflow through the building to try to make a little more sense of the process. So that was also an update that came for this 2022 version.
You know, you mentioned that it follows the outdoor, the air, and I noticed right away the guideline does the same thing. It follows the air in the building. Grayson, can you put up that little outline we put together? I want to kind of paint a picture for the audience that I would imagine most of you do not have a copy of the guideline in front of you right now, but it's enhanced indoor air quality in commercial and international institutional buildings. And it starts with outdoor air quality. It goes over the building itself, the systems and equipment, the indoor air quality, the procedures, the construction, system startup and commissioning, and then operations and maintenance. And then there are the references as well. So what I'd kind of like to do is follow that outline a little bit and get each of you to talk a little bit about the different sections in here. I want to start with the outdoor air quality because when I read it, I was a little surprised. I don't think people think of outdoor air quality as getting better. And actually, when you wrote in this, can someone just kind of explain to our audience what you wrote about in outdoor air quality?
Well, I think one of the things you just mentioned is true. Basically, outdoor air quality has changed in the last decade, but it depends on where you are in the world. It certainly is improved in principal air pollutants have dropped by 73% according to WHO guidelines. Now, some of them have risen over the years. CO2 emissions in particular have shown a gradual increase, but have shown an overall decrease since 2007. And then other air pollutant emissions, such as NO2, are down 44%. Sulfur dioxide levels down 70%, and PM 2.5 is down 18%. So these principal air pollutants have been reduced over that period of time, but that still doesn't mean that there isn't need for additional reductions. And the WHO guidelines that are referenced from 2016 and 2021, that the information is important, even though they are not standards or legally binding criteria. They are designed to provide guidance in reducing the health impacts of air pollution based on expert evaluation of current scientific evidence. So those types of things are important, and that's why indoor air is an interesting section in many ways.
Well, and outdoor air it changes a lot too. I mean, you get a lot of episodic episodes, like, for instance, wildfires are a big issue these days. And Tina, you mentioned earlier that you were involved in the early days of, you do some energy like work, and shutting off the outdoor air was thought to be maybe something that would save some money, obviously, but it caused other problems. How do you see outdoor air these days? Is it a mixed bag?
Definitely. Again, it's improved as Donna talked about, but you really need to bring in the right amount and then treat it properly inside, which is the parts that were really great about Guideline 42. We really talk about not just the outside air as it comes in, but what more can we do once it comes in? But yes, outside air is a mixed bag. It's great. You need that ventilation, but you also only should bring it in when you need to, if you look at the energy side. So
that energy side, I've always been I've been involved in these kind of like battles between the energy people and the facility guys that are worried about indoor air quality. And do you see that often?
Oh yeah, everywhere I go. There's definitely a mixture of people and what's important, but you can manage both. You just have to really communicate and work together on it.
I think what Dawn mentioned earlier is going to help, and that is moving toward looking at dew point as opposed to relative humidity. Would you agree, Tina?
Yeah, I would. Definitely.
Do you see that in your practice? Do you see facilities guys starting to think about dew point as opposed to relative humidity?
I do. I think it's getting better and better. The one little gotcha that we see is that dew point sensors are not quite as there's more work involved in keeping them maintained correctly. And so there's still a little bit of work to be done, I think, in improving that part of things to really make it consistent. So it's a mixed bag, I guess.
Well, and earlier, Elliott, you talked about, you're looking at particles more, and I assume you're dealing a lot with particle, low cost sensors. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how things have evolved over the last 10 years?
Well, there are a lot more low cost sensors on the market. Some of them are quite good, some of them not. But let me hesitate or pause just a moment to go hit on another aspect of the dew point measurements. If you're managing the indoor air humidity, the indoor humidity based on dew point, then you've got a very useful tool in an infrared camera to look for problem spots. Because if you know the dew point of the air in the building, and as Don mentioned, the relative humidity of the air doesn't tell you what's going on at the surface, which is with my background being with mycology. The mold doesn't care about the air, the mold cares about the surface. And if you've got at least 5 or 10 degrees Celsius different between your highest surface temperature and the dew point, then that gap is going to really inhibit any kind of mold growth. So that's a tool that can be coupled with the current version of 62.1 to really help people look quickly and easily for any potential trouble spots. But now to your point about particle sensors, there are a number of low-cost particle sensors that are quite good. They still, many of them will report readings in mass concentration units, that is micrograms per cubic meter. I think that's not good practice. There are particle counters, just report the particle count. The conversion of particle count data to mass data, micrograms per cubic meter, requires 3 or 4 assumptions to make that conversion, that mathematical correction. None of those assumptions are ever true. So you're violating about 4 or 5 assumptions when you convert counts to mass units. I think we'd be better off just sticking with the counts, looking at it, differential measurements. One place is lower particle count than another. It's cleaner air. We should just be aiming for cleaner air rather than looking for some specific threshold, because particulate matter pollution, the health effects of particulate matter do not have a bottom end. The lower you go, the better it is. So just, in my opinion, use particles as a count and try and keep it as low as possible. And that's pretty practical, pretty feasible these days with some of these low-cost sensors that are pretty reliable. So that's a big change over the last 10, 15 years.
Yes, it is. That's very interesting to me. I had not heard that before. As many times as we've done this show, you're the first to bring that up, Elliott. I appreciate that very much. And I always did, when I did particle counting, I did counts, I didn't use the conversion often. So I don't know, maybe I had an inkling that something wasn't quite right. I don't know. But do many particle counters of the low cost kind, are there any you can mention that specifically you think are doing a great job?
I would not, I don't have the brand names on top of my head, but there are several out there. Some of them have been evaluated with third-party testing procedures. Many are not, but the American Association for Aerosol Research for the last 4 or 5 years at least have had papers presented about the use of these low-cost particle counters, and a lot of them are reliable, and there's some very interesting research being done. There are efforts underway to try and couple these low-cost particle sensors with building management systems. There also are community science projects where school children got particle counters hanging on the back of their book bag as they go through the day. How much are they exposed to in transit? How much are they exposed to at home and at school, etc.? So we're seeing a lot of good information come out of some of these sensors.
It's just going to get better over time. That's great to hear. All right. So the next section, we talked about outdoor air. The next section was buildings. And I like how this was worded in here. It said, to avoid microbial growth, the building and its contents must remain dry. To accomplish that, standard 62.1 requires that indoor dew point temperature remain at or below 60. We talked about that. But then it says, keep the indoor air dry enough to reduce the potential for surface moisture absorption that leads to persistent dampness. Damp materials allow microbial growth that can increase the probability of negative health effects. And it goes on to say, although bacteria and fungi are present in all buildings and on all surfaces, their presence is generally without negative consequences for air quality or health until surfaces absorb enough moisture for a long enough period to allow growth and reproduction. I thought that was a pretty good way of explaining that topic. Does that come from somewhere else, or is that something that your committee put together?
Well, we can't take full credit for that. You may recognize the name Lou Harriman.
Absolutely.
He was very responsible for a 2020 ASHRAE document called Damp Buildings, Human Health, and HVAC Design. And it was a report of a ASHRAE multidisciplinary task force on damp buildings. So that's where that information comes from.
And
that was, go ahead, Elliott.
If I can jump in, the concept that we were trying to convey in that paragraph, because I probably had some fingerprints on that paragraph. It's not, microbes are all around us. It's not necessarily who's there or how many are there, but what are they doing? I use an analogy sometimes. It's like teenagers in your basement. You really care that much about how many are down there or who is down there, but you really care about what are they doing down there. So when building materials and surfaces become damp enough, accumulate enough moisture for these microbes to kick into gear, that's when the metabolism starts. That's when they start producing all sorts of stuff was not there before. And that's the concept that also keys into the dew point limit, which helps you control moisture accumulation in materials and on surfaces, and takes the focus away from what is the relative humidity in the air in the middle of a room.
I think that's a great statement for people to put even in their reports. That it helps explain it in layman's terms for people that are dealing with buildings and trying to maintain and inspect buildings and so on. Another topic under buildings was unintended airflow across the envelope, which I think is a big topic. And Tina, I'm sure that's something you deal with a lot. Tell our listeners a little bit about the importance of unintended airflow across buildings.
Well, anytime you have unintended airflow, you're having unintended consequences. And I guess I don't remember exactly what the quote is or the section, but in my world, if we have unintended airflow, we're also wasting energy. So it's a combination of the two.
And how do you stop unintended airflow?
There's stopping the entrainment, building envelope sealing, and managing that airflow. I guess, does that answer your question?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
I
think that's
do with a good design.
Yeah.
Well, that's where I was headed. I think that's what your group does, Tina. You design and help people with managing unintended airflows.
Yeah, and a lot of what I work in are existing buildings, not a new building. So I also deal in trying to manage it after the fact, and that's probably even harder sometimes. Because
there was another section under buildings that kind of caught me a little off guard. I don't know why, but it was requirements for buildings containing environmental tobacco smoke areas and ETS-free areas. How big of a topic is that? I mean, how many buildings still have environmental tobacco smoke areas?
From what I've seen, it depends on the state you're in and the area. There's a few. It's a lot less than obviously it was when I started in the industry. But in fact, it seems like people are, in fact, not just making no smoke within the building, but within a certain distance from the building as well. So it is getting better. But there still are some locations out there, for instance, casinos, you know, and that sort of operation, they still use some of that tobacco inside the building.
And I think airports.
Yeah, airports that
Yeah.
tend to have that too. Yeah. Also, remember, this is an international standard. And if you go beyond North America, there are a lot of places where smoking is not really as restricted as it is in the United States. So there are going to be situations where there are people still smoking in buildings there, where, you know, large buildings, particularly in either Southeast Asia or in Europe or in Africa, which may benefit by having this particular standard out or guideline out there in terms of that.
Let's go back to the outline there, Grayson. Put that up so we can kind of show people where we're at right now within the standard. So we started with the outdoor air quality. We're talking a little bit about buildings now. I want to move into systems and equipment. And I noticed under systems and equipment, there were some interesting topics, one of them being outdoor air intakes. I didn't expect as much detailed discussion of outdoor air intakes as I saw in the guidance document. Why is there such detailed discussion of outdoor air intakes?
I guess I'll take this real quick. I can give a overview there. It's still a concept where people are putting, or it ends up as you modify a building, you are not putting those intakes in the right location. That's one piece. And you're getting re-entrainment of air and from exhaust, as an example. And so it isn't so much in original design, but we're finding it a lot in existing buildings I see it all the time in hospitals, unfortunately, where they have every intention, but they've modified the building so many times, that was not thought of early enough and through the process. So.
And Dawn, I'm assuming, you know, in all your evaluations you've done all over the place, is outdoor air intake location a common problem for you?
Oh yeah, I mean, basically, if you got the one I remember the most vividly was a survey where we were looking at the roof-mounted HVAC units, and within 10 feet they had a discharge, and so they were wondering why were they getting so much pollution or you know, areas where they were continuing to have problems with indoor air quality. Well, it's because the outtake was not really going to the outside. It was going and being re-entrained into the HVAC unit. So it's quite common to have that kind of problem. Now it's getting less so as people renovate buildings and do something about the number of HVAC units they have on the roof. But it's still a major problem in terms of making sure that doesn't take place.
Another section in there under systems and equipment is one that is near and dear to our hearts here, and that is options for improved cleanliness and access. I think that's an important topic that oftentimes gets overlooked. You spent a good bit of time and there's references in many of the sections actually to improved cleanliness and access. I wonder if how did that come about? Why did that become such an important topic in this document?
I think more than anything else, it's because we're going to the enhanced level rather than just the minimum level. So the minimal level is that 80% of the people don't have a problem in terms of the air quality. The 20%, if you have greater than 20%, is considered to be an issue. That's our criteria. With enhanced, you're looking beyond that. You're looking to try to make it so that everyone feels comfortable. Maybe not 100%, but definitely greater than 80%, so that you get a higher level of cleanliness, a higher level of improved indoor air, the types of problems that you may run into, such as bringing in, for example, different types of animals into the building. We have that now with guardian dogs and things like that. What type of hazards do we exist or may exist because of that? So you want to go beyond what you have as far as the minimum in 62.1, and the best way to do that is to have a higher level of cleanliness in the building.
You know, there was a comment, excuse me, and that improved access, it should be the law that every AC coil have easy panel removal to inspect both the top and the bottom, clean and dirty sides. Actually, I thought you did a pretty good job in this document of describing just that and going over moisture carryover in very detailed terms. I'm wondering why it was there was so much detail in that area. I assume it's because you had a lot of ASHRAE people involved in this as well, because that's their baby, dealing with those coils. But there was a lot of very interesting information on coil spacing and, coil access and so on. Anybody want to comment on that?
I think basically what I saw the comment from Scott. Scott is a good friend of mine, of course. I'll have to get him a copy of the book somehow so that he can get some of these ideas. Yes, you're absolutely right. Most or a good portion of the people who are writing this chapter, there he is, there's Scott's clapping. Basically, what we're looking to do is to take the ideas that have been percolating within the different committees, the standard settings committees and within ASHRAE, and go beyond them. And that's quite honestly quite an effort, as we've talked about. And it wasn't always with a lot of agreement. Okay, let me tell you, there's people who have different ideas and different ways of approaching it. But we feel that this document is the starting point for looking at working closely together with people who are in the indoor air area, ASHRAE, and obviously with the occupational doctors and nurses and things of that nature. They can look at all of this, and some of it is pretty straightforward. And I think that's why we did it that way, is to make sure that people have an opportunity to actually enhance their indoor air quality if they take the different sections that we are talking about and apply them to the buildings that they're either building or that they're renovating.
All right, I've got another question on that section, and then we'll go to halftime in a moment here. But cleaning is mentioned and access quite a bit throughout the document, but I didn't see any good references or descriptions of how to do the cleaning, what type of cleaning. Is that something that's hard to find?
I'm going to defer to Tina on that. Do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I don't know that we probably focused as much as we should have on finding the references for that. So I couldn't tell you exactly if there are good references, but what I would tell you is this document is under continuous maintenance, meaning that we are going to continue to work on making it better and better. And that's certainly an area that we want to focus on, along with many others. There's constant good stuff happening.
And we don't need to be people don't need to be on the committee to make continuous maintenance proposals. So if somebody has information on how to find cleaning procedures, the committee is certainly would welcome that. Very much.
I'm wondering, I didn't notice NADCA, the National Air Duct Cleaners Association, any of their standards referenced. Did I miss it, or was it left out for a reason?
It wasn't left out for a reason, okay?
No, I don't think so.
It was just not necessarily what we were looking at in terms of enhanced indoor air quality. I mean, they are very good at what they do. I mean, as you well know, I have lots of good colleagues working in IAQA and elsewhere who do that kind of work. But it isn't necessarily what this document was about. And certainly we can look at what they might propose and be glad to consider it within the committee. Tina, you have some more thoughts on that?
No, I was going to say, I think there's a lot of, we can only cover so many things all at once. And again, this was the first time we wrote the document. And so we're always looking for ways to enhance it. And that very well could be an area. We just didn't happen to pull their information into this one at this point.
How often do these get revised, Tina?
Joe, remember 62.1 is a design document for new buildings. And the Guideline 42 is an overlay, as you mentioned before, of 62.1, but it's all about design of new buildings, not operations. So duct cleaning, if appropriate, if needed, is certainly valuable, but that would be in a different document, I think.
Okay. And Tina, how often is this going to be revised?
We're looking, I believe, either on a 3-year or a 5-year cycle. I think it's great.
But keep in mind what we said is the committee meets more frequently. So if you have a some change that you're interested in or have some questions, you can certainly submit them in to ASHRAE, and they will be answered by the committee probably on a quarterly basis because we meet at least 4 times a year.
All right, let's go to halftime, Grayson. I'm a little behind, but I wanted to make sure we broke it at a logical spot. Association sponsors are AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World, AIHA.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at byoplanet.com. Actionable insights at getinsights.org. Actionable insights, no more mistakes, no more missed line items in your Xactimate estimates at getinsights.org. All right, we're back. We've got Tina Brueckner, Dr. Elliott Horner, and Don Weeks talking about the ASHRAE Guideline 42, Enhanced Indoor Air Quality in Commercial and Institutional Buildings. Cliff, before I go on, I want to make sure you get a chance to jump in here. Did you have any questions or follow-ups or comments?
Well, no, I think just, Scott Armour's discussion point regarding cleanliness, I think that, he wanted to know what the difference was between dust in the system and same dust in the occupied space. I think it's different because within the systems it concentrates around turning vanes. It constant, anytime you hit an obstruction, anytime you change pressure, so on and so forth, it's going to concentrate in those areas, and a lot of it's also going to concentrate more on horizontals as well. So just that comment.
Cliff, you've had a long history in the cleaning industry. Can you think of any documents that maybe we could recommend be included here?
Maybe NADCA stuff, I would think.
Okay.
There's a new IICRC document that Tom Jacobel's put together, which is really cleaning systems following mold remediation, fire restoration, so on and so forth, that has some pretty good information in it. So
yeah, but that would be more toward existing buildings, I guess.
That's more towards that's more towards not so much existing buildings, just more towards problems. So it doesn't matter if it's a problem in a new building or problem during construction or problem afterwards. It's just more event related, because I think that's sometimes where a lot of the challenges come.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to the indoor air quality section. This one is loaded with great information. Some of the topics of interest are ventilation, air distribution, plenum system recommendations, air classification, and recirculation, which is one I definitely want to hit on. And then it does a good job of going over the different types of pollutants, particles, microorganisms, and viruses, gases and mixtures, talks about ozone. We don't have time to go through everything, but I want to make sure our audience knows what all's in there. I guess what I would ask is that each of you comment on that section and give us what you think are some of the key points. Let's start with you, Tina.
Well, you started with me.
That's what we call an audible. You never know what he's doing.
Yeah, I didn't do that one very well. I guess an area that we don't see as much of anymore are plenum systems, but they're still there in existing buildings. So that was an area that was very interesting to me at the time, and coming up with how do we handle that and making sure that that stays clean and properly maintained.
You were reading my mind, Tina. That was when I read that section, I was like, "Ooh, this is one that I used to run into all the time, especially in schools." Can you go over? Do you remember some of the key recommendations on plenum systems? How to make sure that when you do have a plenum system, it's at least somewhat supporting indoor air quality.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact pieces. I guess Don or Elliott, do you remember?
Dawn, do you recall?
No. I'm actually trying to look for the standard right now and look. I was preparing to be the next after Tina that talks about some of these contaminants, which I think are important. Give us a chance to get back to Joe on that, and we'll make sure it gets into the blog that Cliff will put in. But right now, I don't have it on the top of my head on this. Elliott,
did you want to comment there?
Well, I will just jump ahead to the different procedures if you want to. One of the newer aspects of ASHRAE 62.1 2022 was a revision of the IAQ procedure, and a substantial improvement, in my opinion, there was having a list of design compounds that an engineer could, when using the IAQ procedure, would have some specific compounds to model against with their mass balance equations. Also, it provides a relatively short list of gas phase compounds that manufacturers of air cleaners, gas phase air cleaners, can request to be tested with in a laboratory test to evaluate the efficacy of these gas phase air cleaners. And that was a battle within 62.1 and with various commenters over at least 6 or 8 years to be able to get something in about how to what to look for, what specific compounds to look for examples, and to facilitate adoption of the IAQ procedure. And that's a big step forward. And there's also, you're probably aware, a lot of activity right now within ASHRAE looking at developing test methods for various gas phase air cleaners other than just racks of carbon. So that was a big step forward, I thought, in my opinion, mirroring to some degree the trend within indoor air quality of going from reactive problem solving to proactive, let's avoid bad situations that we've learned about in the past.
And maybe we could go into a little more detail on the 3 procedures to design for indoor air quality: the ventilation rate procedure versus the indoor air quality procedure versus the natural ventilation procedure. Elliott, you just talked about the indoor air quality procedure and the list of contaminants. I noticed that it was also in the guidance. I think it's the same one that's in 62.1. Is that accurate?
It should be, yes.
Okay.
The ventilation rate procedure, most people are familiar with. It's the simplest. Even a biologist can handle that degree of math. How many square feet do you have? How many people do you have? You get so much per square foot of space and so much per person. You add those together, and that's how much air you push into the building. The IAQ procedure is designed and has been in 62.1 for a long time, but had not been widely adopted. It allows a designer to reduce the amount of outdoor air ventilation if it can be shown to not negatively affect the indoor air quality. And that requires understanding what pollutants might be there and what the impact would be of design features. And that could be, design features can include low emitting materials. That could be also involve air cleaning, which allows you to reuse the air and save energy while not impacting negatively the indoor air quality. The other procedure is, I believe, a natural ventilation procedure, and I'm not qualified to speak on that one, so I'll just mention that it is out there. That's the third procedure.
That was kind of new to me too. Dawn, do you know more? Can you tell us more about that one?
Yeah, that's again goes back to the international basis of these standards. Many of the buildings that we go into in North America and in Europe are usually either heated or air conditioned in some fashion. There's a mechanical ventilation system. but that's not the case in many other parts of the world. So when you want to basically meet the requirements of 62.1 and you don't have a mechanical system in place, the natural ventilation system or procedure will allow you to show that you've done all you can to prevent the inside problem of contaminants from outside being an issue. So it's there because there are many buildings where this is going to be pertinent, and they're not just residential. They're big commercial areas. There's medical facilities. There's all sorts of areas that don't have a mechanical system where this particular method or procedure can help them improve the indoor air quality.
Very helpful. All right. So that actually was, we kind of got into, Grayson, put that slide back up if you would. So we've gone through the outdoor air. Yes, Cliff.
It wasn't me.
Oh, okay. We've gone through the outdoor air quality, the buildings, system and equipment, the indoor air quality. And actually, we just talked about some of the procedures when we talked about the ventilation rate procedure, the indoor air quality procedure, et cetera. Next is construction system startup and commissioning. And there were some really good tips on how to do construction without affecting IAQ. I think it referenced the SMACNA document, the sheet metal and air conditioning contractors, which is for buildings under construction. Several other good references in there. There's also a section on air cleaning devices. And I wondered if anybody would like to comment on air cleaning devices, which is a huge topic right now.
I guess I just make a quick comment. We have some really good information in there around air cleaning devices, but it is an area that is continuously changing. And so a big focus was to make sure it was around devices that have had the proper testing and making sure that they will actually be effective. That was a constant, especially during the whole COVID world, right, that we've been living in lately. There were a lot of things that were happening in that arena that we wanted to make sure we were really going to the pieces that have a testing involved. And I know that ASHRAE in other areas are working hard, and I'm sure there are other organizations as well, on getting some test methods around this area that are more robust than what we have right now. And so we think that's an area that will grow quite a bit in this guidance.
Yes, if I can jump in on that, the AHAM is one of the other organizations that now has for residential air cleaners a test procedure for gas phase air cleaning. And the COVID epidemic triggered the development of ASHRAE 241, which most people are familiar with, ventilation for control for managing infectious aerosols. That included a test procedure, a set of test requirements, both looking for efficacy for gas phase air cleaners, as well as looking for any byproducts. And that was a warp speed development standard. It did not go through the ANSI process. It will be in the future. It's also under continuous maintenance, but it has also triggered ASHRAE 145 standard, which is for gas phase air cleaners, to develop program test procedures for air cleaners that are not single pass. And there are a lot of those out there, and that will be a fairly robust test plan. And 62.1 will now be able to point to some of those other standards for evaluating both the efficiency, the efficacy, as well as safety. Is looking for any deleterious byproduct production for any gas phase air cleaners. So there's a big step forward in that. And 62.1 had worked on that for years, as Tina mentioned, and certainly got a lot of action jump-started after the pandemic.
Great. There's a lot going on, Elliott, and I appreciate you jumping in there and adding that. That's all important information. Now, another area under operations and maintenance, I believe, is contaminants introduced by occupants. And that is always something that people doing indoor air quality work have to deal with. And I found that to be an interesting section. I did not notice any comments on personal care products or having a program for how occupants can avoid causing indoor air quality issues. Did I miss that, or was that something that needs to be added?
I would say that you're right. There's nothing specific in there in terms of personal products. So yes, it would be something that we would suggest that if there is an interest in that you go through the system of making a comment or asking a question, whoever that might be, and certainly can be addressed before the next edition comes out. But you're right, it isn't in there. What is in there though is information about what other people might bring into office buildings, plants. As we already mentioned, animals of one sort or another, their companions, things of that nature, and just just the everyday slush that you bring in from the outside, which can contain all sorts of stuff that's on the bottom of your shoes. Which brings up an interesting topic that doesn't have addressed in this document, but there is a lot of movement afoot to have people take off their shoes, particularly in northern climates, so they don't track it throughout the entire facility. And so there's a lot there, but it's not complete as yet. We're looking always to add new things. So if that's something that's of interest, please make use the continuous maintenance system and get it in there.
I only bring it up because I find people complaining, especially now with this axe and that the kids use, and they and it's very irritating to people who have sensitivities, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And it's a hard one to address because now you're talking about personal freedoms and being able to wear your perfume or your deodorant or whatever without somebody telling you, no, you can't wear that deodorant here. So I think that's going to be a tough issue for you down the road.
Yeah, there's definitely a movement afoot in certain areas. I know in the province of Nova Scotia, they've had a law put into place, or what they call a bylaw, actually, which says that you cannot enter a building if you are using personal products in what is considered to be excessive manner. And so there's been a lot of test case over there in terms of doing that. So you're right, it's an issue that's going to be continuing to be an issue.
And Cliff, before we jump to the roundup, any questions or comments?
No, I'm good.
All right. I see we got a couple messages. If you could check does the ASHRAE guidelines suggest or recommend numerical IAQ standards or guidelines?
I think it points to the ones in 62.1.
Yeah, and keep in mind that these are usually based on criteria from other organizations, not necessarily from ASHRAE itself. So, for example, in the table that is in 62.1, a lot of them are from the California guidance in terms of levels. So there are guidelines there. They're not necessarily standards because this is not that type of document, but there is a lot of information out there that gives you some guidance as to what is acceptable and what is not.
All right, I've got one more text that I think is really interesting. Can you address the health of occupants? Is there info on how to assess either risk assessment or impact, particularly the reduction of risk through the implementation of the guideline and occupant complaints? Who wants to jump on that one?
Well, you're throwing more grenades at us today than usual, Joe. Basically, I would say that the informative sections are addressing that. If you look at that outline that you provided if you want to have Grayson put it up again, I'll show the section that we're talking about. If you have Appendix A, it talks about the health impacts of air pollutants. So that particular informative Appendix A is something that you should take a look at in the book, and I think it will be helpful in that regard.
Hey, while you've got that up, if you could just kind of go through these other informative appendixes. It's the only thing I think we didn't get to at this point, except for startup.
Well, the humidity issue, informative Appendix B, we talked about. It's about zeroing in on the impacts of humidity and microbial growth, and discusses also dew point, I believe. And I will let somebody else take care of the next two.
Tina, can you comment on the carryover?
Sure. That appendix really is going through a lot of the impacts on indoor air quality in energy recovery and having that crossover of the outside air and exhaust entrainment into your indoor space. So it goes through some calculations for you. I'd also say Appendix D is case studies, and that's a great area that where it's giving some specific examples of using the IAQ procedure, which, as Don had mentioned, hadn't been widely accepted because it was pretty complicated. The intention with those case studies is to help someone who wants to use that and actually see it in practice. So give some case studies there. And then Appendix E is the references for.
Fantastic. Let's go to the roundup, Grayson. All right, let's start with the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. Cliff, I haven't been able to follow all the chat, but do you have any final comments or questions?
I think there was one on there that Ralph Frelick had, which was, does ASHRAE guidelines suggest or recommend any numerical IAQ standards or guidelines?
And the answer to that, Cliff, is that it's two areas. One I've pointed to is the informative Appendix A, which does discuss some of that. But in the section on indoor air quality, there are numerical numbers that are put up as guidance. And many of them come from the California, I forget what the CREC stands for, but there is a table that talks about a number of different contaminants that would be there. So that's where I would look if Ralph is interested in looking at in that areas.
Thank you.
I want to mention there's a good section on construction, system startup, and commissioning. We didn't talk a lot about that, but commissioning is such an important topic that I just wanted to make sure we emphasize how important that is. Tina, I assume that is one of the big things that your group deals with a lot.
Yes, we do. It's really making sure that it actually works the way you intended when you did the design or had the ideas. And I deal with that every day. If it's not commissioned right, you're probably going to have a problem later. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And then operations and maintenance is a huge topic that, we've talked a little bit about, but I think that section is very important. What I was thinking while I'm reading this, I used to teach courses and I'm like, oh, this would be a great document to develop a course for people who manage buildings, even though it goes above and beyond what, 62.1 requires. That's what they need. And it gives good, solid guidance to them. Are there any thoughts about developing a course that would kind of follow this and presenting that to operations and maintenance people all over the world?
Well, of course,
yeah,
we should do that. I mean, but we just came off an 8-year cycle on this particular topic.
Come on, Dawn.
Give us a chance to catch up. Maybe we need an education, or maybe we need an educator on this group.
Yeah, I think so.
I was going to say the same thing.
Dawn, you were the one that mentioned warp speed before. If you did it once, you can do it again.
Yeah, Joe, are you up for warp speeding this?
I'm kind of sliding into retirement here. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but
you'll be like Don in retirement. He has all that extra time on his hands.
Yeah. Right. Ask Lynchy.
Yeah, exactly. But on a more serious note, yes, it is certainly an idea that we've talked about, and we are, as a committee, we're going to continue to keep this, keep this evergreen. Because we have to answer to the questions that people have, the comments that people have, the changes people want to put in. So the committee itself is going to go on, and those types of things will be something that they'll discuss.
Hey, Joe, you didn't forget about me, did you?
No, Pete.
That's right.
You gotta let me jump in now. I didn't want to interrupt, but
go for it.
I've already sent the text. I'm gonna be late for my 1 o'clock Zoom, and I don't want to say on the air the two people that I pushed off. So listen, great show, guys. I have a few comments that I'd like Cliff to put into the blog, and then I have a question I'm going to raise for the committee. Don, maybe you may kick it off, and it was based on a conversation I had with Carl Grimes the other day. So anytime I come off a conversation with Carl, it's interesting, and it's directly related to some ASHRAE stuff. The first thing I want to say is this whole thing with dew point, I'm glad it's coming up. When I first started exposed to dew point was in the 1980s, before I actually went to work for Dry's and started teaching the psychometrics in those classes. And it really came from Munters. Munters were the guys, and they always talked about dew point. It wasn't until late 80s, early 90s, when I met Phil Morey and Elliott, we started talking about water activity and the differences. So I think dew point is great. Now, from our industry standpoint, well, and actually the other thing, Lou Herman wrote a book with Cargo Care in the early 90s called the Moisture Control Handbook. And they talked about the use and application of humidity control systems to control dew point in southern climates in supermarkets, with the doors opening and closing all the time and everything dripping. So this whole thing of dew point's been around a long time, but it's been under the radar. So I'm glad to see it happen. From the restoration industry standpoint, we have gotten so sophisticated now with the monitoring systems, remote monitoring, all cloud-based technology to measure all this stuff. So if you guys are not familiar with that, inviting somebody from that sector may be helpful for you, because we have to do it in restoration to show that we're in compliance with industry standards, but more so to provide documentation so we get customers to pay the bills. So, that's a big driver. So anyway, I thought that'd be something helpful. Now, the other thing is, I remember those 62 days. I was around then. And I remember the argument and the multiple public reviews it went to was a battle between, is ASHRAE going to write a technical document, or are they going to deal with health issues, which was, was more right brain than left brain that ASHRAE is normally with. And that was probably one of the reasons why it took so long to get it out. But I could see now, and I think this started with that position paper that ASHRAE wrote on mold. I don't know, Don, if you were part of that, but I think Lou Herman was the lead author, and he's presented that to a number of different audiences, including restoration. I thought it was interesting. So it seems that ASHRAE started at least moving in that direction to create this hybrid mix, if you would, between technical stuff as engineers and, of course, the implications of the health. So I think that's a good thing. So let me get to the key point here that I got into a discussion with Mr. Grimes about. He said that he is on a committee now, and ASHRAE is writing a position paper on indoor environmental quality. And I suspect that there's some AIHA people on there too, because it seems that it crosses over into the industrial hygiene area. Now, this conversation came up with Carl because it differentiated. I wanted to talk to him to get his viewpoint to difference between indoor air quality and outdoor air quality. And apparently under ASHRAE's charter, they don't deal with the outdoor air. And all the outdoor environmental risks, that all kinds is mostly regulated, comes under the EPA stuff. But the indoor, this is something that he told me, which was new to me. He said it's broken down into 4 areas. The first area, which directly impacts indoor air quality, are things that our audience, and we're all familiar with, that there's 3 primary drivers of indoor air quality problems, either VOCs, microbials, or particulate matter. I learned that years ago when I was teaching with Gene Cole for Tulsa and all that kind of stuff. So that's just one category. The other 2 are noise, sound, or the other 3, heat. And I guess heat's a really big one. And then I think the third one was light. Now, if I got that wrong, Don, you can correct me because you're an ASHRAE guy and an AIH guy. But it seemed to me in talking to Carl, when I listened to you got this show, that position paper is going to overlap or be pretty closely aligned and parallel to the standard that you guys are creating. Now, did I miss something, or am I kind of on the right track there? So I'll turn it over to you guys to comment on that, because I think it's very relevant to the show. And if your 2 committees aren't talking, you probably should be.
Well, I can say this much: we definitely talk to each other. There's no doubt about that. Sometimes we even make progress. You never know. But yes, there is. I want to focus on one thing that Pete came up with, which is the whole idea of health being a separate item from indoor air quality and from ventilation and things of that nature. That was a rule of the board. They call it a ROB. Which is that they would not allow because of the idea that the engineers were not health experts. They shouldn't be commenting upon health as being part of this issue, which has been now eliminated. It just got voted down in the meeting in the winter. So we, as an organization, recognize health is a very big part of what we do within ASHRAE. And so the paper that you're talking about is certainly going to be something that when she knows a lot about, because she's on the health and wellness PD physician document on that. So she and Charlene Bayer and some other folks are working on that, Pete. So I think that you're going to see more of that type of activity going forward, which I'm very much happy to see, because I've been a member of ASHRAE since 1999. And this is now I can actually speak up about health, which before was not always considered to be something that we wanted to have as part of the discussion. So thank you, Pete, as always, for bringing up those comments.
So Don, I saw Len, she put something in the chat log there about being on that committee. So I think that's great. The other one little thing I want to remind everybody, in case Cliff or Joe forget, but that thing earlier in the show where you said when you got the Audible turn, you said you have to check on it and get back. So it's in the blog. And a couple of things that we've been talking about, because the document, we could do a couple 2 hours, 3 hour show in this, but remember, we have the afterthoughts, and the afterthoughts is where all these things can kind of be ferreted out. And so it would seem to me that that's where we can, bring the information that you got to take a look at. It doesn't get in the blog or whatnot. But anyway, terrific job. Elliott or Tina, you guys have any comments on any of the comments I made before I log off here?
No, I just thank you, Joe, for your comments, and good to hear your voice again.
Great to see you, Elliott. Tina, any final thoughts before we go?
No, just thank you for letting me participate, and look forward to, I'm going to now participate and actually listen to your blog. I didn't know about it before, so this is great.
Well, it's great to have you on board, and thanks for joining us today. It was a real pleasure meeting you. And Dawn, before we go, final thoughts?
Just that, if you're interested in the book, which hopefully this was our created interest, please go to the ASHRAE bookstore. It's on sale now as either a PDF or as a hardcover book. So, go ahead and make your, get some information about that and go and pick it up, and hopefully then generate some questions or comments on the overall document.
Yeah, it's one I'd highly recommend. I think it's one that should be in your, if you're dealing with indoor air quality, it's one you should be aware of, and one that you should probably have in your library. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks for all your hard work in putting this together. I know it wasn't an easy lift. So these documents can be a whole heck of a lot of work, and you don't get paid. So thanks again for your time on the document and your time with us today. This is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks to this week's guests, Tina Brueckner, Dr. Elliott Horner, and Dawn Weeks. Also my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, Grayson, Gone Fish and Fisher at the controls. Most importantly, our sponsors and loyal audience. We'll see you in 2 weeks with the next live episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.
So we're still recording?